Hi everyone, I'm Sunny and today's video will be about Neptune in the third or Neptune in Gemini. If you guys have this placement, you will notice that you will start romanticizing your neighborhood, your surrounding like early childhood years where maybe it's your I think I already said the neighborhood, but like your school, your extracurricular activities after school, even maybe your early childhood friends for some extended time, but not so much like as an adult, but more or less where you grew up basically. So you could have that, or maybe even the fact that you could romanticize certain memories or see them with rose-colored glasses when it comes to childhood memories or anything related to your siblings or cousins or like young youthful people, even kids, but kids might also be entailing a little bit of the fifth house, but specifically just people you interacted with or befriended in that fun, charismatic kind of way. So I always think of this placement like, I think it's called LDN with by Lily Allen, where she's walking on her neighborhood and she's basically having a good time and seeing everything with rose-colored glasses, where she sees everybody have a great time. She sees how wonderful people are connecting with each other, and then also having this moment of like, well, there's glimpses of many things, but it's like people interacting and having a good time where they're actually good overall. So you can notice this, and it might not be that way. I like how there's I think the best way to say it, there's like a contrast between what she envisions like as she's walking throughout her neighborhood and then what's actually happening, where it's a lot more sketch, you know. It's a sketchy type of place. And it's funny. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of other connotations, like how people romanticize, I guess she lived in London maybe at some point. I don't remember the video, but I just remember it was in the UK. But I do remember that maybe people romanticize certain locations like this, and then you go in person and they're very different when it comes to how you see them when they're and with your fresh eyes, and when you see them with your own eyes through media or what people portray on TV and stuff like that, or even music videos. So it could be like that. So it can be very different. I think it's another great example would be people who live in Paris, for example. People romanticize Paris, which is fine. It is a nice city, but when you go there in person, or even New York City too, when you go there in person, it could possibly smell like pee. The subways could be, have that stench, or the streets too. The rats. There's defecation in the streets, public. I mean, people don't care, but it's just the amount of, disposal of stuff, like in loitering and stuff like that, is very noticeable. But people still enjoy these locations, mostly because it's an experience. It's a cultural experience, and you enjoy the people surrounding you and the artistic feels and stuff like that. So that could be sometimes what Neptune in the third can feel like. It's like when you do visit locations, or you sometimes live with the transits and locations like this, you might just go because it's you're experiencing certain things, not so much because it's always like beautiful and amazing. Sometimes it can be. People always think like, I mean, this is another placement where you can go like to the beach, or you could live in like sea areas or lakes or close to other things like that, and it can still be very pretty, maybe isolated too. But I mean, there's different ways where you can see beauty, right? So Neptune beautifies things when it's really not always that beautiful, but you see the spiritual aspect of it, where it can be very beneficial to you, or you can start noticing that it's very, I guess it's a great learning experience to be in such locations, because you learn about your creativity and how you get that flowing out, and you start being more creative with yourself and others. So I guess it's a great example of how there's two sides to the coin of every planet and every placement. There's good days, there's bad days, there's better locations. There's not that great better of locations, but it's a good example of how we can romanticize things in such locations. Or when you travel to, you can be like, well, I want to travel to, I don't know, like Japan, but then you start noticing, oh, well, you know, I don't have certain amenities as a certain gender because, you know, like it's one thing, I guess it's another way of saying it because Neptune is foreigners. When you start going to locations, it's one thing that you're going as a foreigner, and that's any place in the planet, and that's fine. You might notice that you might be more okay with romanticizing it like that, like, oh, it was such a great experience. But when you live in that location, it's very different. I think you might have a harder time making ends meet too. For example, it might be easier for people to acquire jobs with it might not easier, but you might have easier time getting jobs that nobody wants to work regardless of your ethnicity. And it's just because you're a foreigner, you have to adjust to basically having the jobs nobody wants. Not necessarily dirty jobs, but they're like very underpaid, very taken advantage of kind of jobs. That is Neptune. Like Neptune can be very giving, but it's like giving to a fault where people might take advantage of your kindness and be like, well, you can stay the extra shifts, right? You don't mind having the extra pay, but it's really not that much difference of a pay. So it could be like that. Or they might not respect, you know, too many of the time. Like example, if you have a set amount of hours and you have sick days and stuff, they're like, oh, well, you know, you can work an extra day, or we'll call you in, like we'll respect your day off, but we'll still call you in. I know Neptune's not always like a work kind of planet, but Mercury is commerce to an extent, so it can be like that where you start learning that it's not that great. You idealize things that are not that great once you're living there, because you might overextend yourself to the point of exhaustion because it can create fatigue. And it might not be great. Your body might not want to be so in the grind. I think your body will eventually catch up and be like, I gotta take breaks, I gotta take naps, I have to rest the body. That is Neptune. Neptune likes to take it slower. Mercury is fast, so it's interesting how it's like very different dynamics of wanting to do things a certain way, thinking of certain things, but then your actions are very odd. Not necessarily contradicting, but it's like, I didn't think you would do it that way. It's just one of those things. So you might notice that too. So like, you could be in the most beautiful location, but you could be broke. You could be in the best location or the worst locations, but you could have a good amount of money. It really is about not necessarily how you see things, but how you deal with the actions, right? So learning to deal with that is kind of tricky. I might add more notes onto that because I just think there's more to say, but basically it's like that, where you could be residing or just transiting in very beautiful locations that could even be isolating and it's just you, but it's a really nice place, it's a really good time, and I think you're gonna have a good time. For the most part, Neptune is a planet that it's enjoyable. It's not always like negative, but I mean, it's pros and cons. There's good days, there's bad days, but you can also imagine yourself, not imagining, but you could also want to be trying new things. I'm trying to say this in a not triggering word away for the algorithm, but you can be more prone to being okay with trying substances in foreign lands, beverages, alcoholic beverages too, and or maybe not know when to stop, mostly because you might not know what the ingredients are. You're like, oh, I didn't know I had 40% like or 50% alcohol in this. Like it can be like that. So you might not measure yourself quite well, and you might, you know, go a little hard. You might party a little hard in that aspect of having a good time, a little too much of a good time. And it can be like that, or you could have the more negative experiences where you might not know when you're being tricked into participating in such activities. But that's also the fifth house. Trying to word this delicately, but that's the best way I can say it. So it could be like that. Neptune is foggy, so you never know what you're getting, or you might not know the full extent of the truth in whatever Neptunian way you're not aspecting, but I can't say it. Whatever Neptunian way you're coming about in this house. So aside from that, you can also, like, I guess when you're traveling, you might notice that I don't necessarily think that you're going to be super superficial when it comes to the kind of transportation or vehicles you're taking. So like, you can be interested in traveling and stuff, but I don't think you're like, I have to be first class every trip. No, I think you'd be very accommodating, like you not minding to go on bus and for long hours, or drive. You can also be someone that hops on a boat, on a ferry, on a bike, on a motorcycle, on a scooter, on a plane, an aircraft. Like, you're very accommodating and mutable in terms of how you get to that location, for example. But if there's a preference, I guess you could easily have access to the preference, because it is, you might not know how you get the means to it, but you make it happen. There's something magical about this placement that you just know. You might not know how you're getting there, but you just make it happen. It's just an interesting thing to say. So you can also be the kind of person who gets a type of vehicle, like a hippie van, and you like to, what are they called? There's a word for it and I can't think of the word. And it can also be Aquarius placements too with this, but what's that, where you travel and you don't have a specific home. And this can also apply to other placements, but you basically travel and it's through your car, and you basically like land in very different landmarks of like national parks, parking lots, and stuff like that. I'm gonna remember the word, but basically van life. Wow, why did I have such a hard time? It's van life. You could be interested in doing van life, and you like the flexibility it entails, because you can be in very different locations and you can get inspired to be musical, to be creative, to be painting, to be creating your own works of art through fashion, or even sewing. Like, I mean, Mercury is a house, well, it's a place, it's a planet, but in this house it's mercurial, so you can be very dexterous with your hands and be very creative in that aspect. So that's what I'm saying, like, you're going to be working with your hands a lot in that aspect. Or maybe you can create jewelry too. Neptune is pretty big. Mercury also kind of gives you that skill of like, you choose what you want. You can make the practice of it and you can sell it. So I do think you could have that skill, like, in a positive way. It could be something that you learn to do, but you might have issues like wanting to, for example, so if you create, let's say, really cute bows, you might not want to start adding a price to it. It's your ethics, for example, mostly because you don't have the heart to, like, you want to receive something, but you don't have the heart to ask people for money. You might not, some people might not have an issue with it. Some people are born with that, like, yes, it's going to be this, but you might be a little bit more private sometimes about wanting to receive a transactional fee, I guess, of like, if I give you this, you give me that kind of thing. So you might take some time, or it might be a little bit more difficult, or some people might not mind asking for it. It's like, oh, it's for a good cause or something like that. It could be one of those things where you're a little bit more humanitarian sometimes. It's like, you're helping me in my dream to create a beautiful dream kind of thing. So you might have that for some people. You could eventually learn to put up boundaries. It's like, hey, my work is not going to be free. It costs me money to waste on the ingredients or the products, and then the laborious work is X amount of time and of hours in the day, so I have to keep that in mind, plus, you know, the presentation. And then finally when you sell it, people will like sometimes want to lower the price, for example, or they think it's like they might, it's not that they might want to bicker with you, but it's like they don't also they think it's worth something, but sometimes they want to take advantage to some extent, I guess, to lower it so it could be beneficial for them to have that item that you're offering, and you're just gonna allow that sometimes from time to time. But it might be something that you're gonna learn to be like, no, this is the price, please understand, this is why. Like, you could explain things and eventually it could be more stern, but you could be like, take it or leave it. Like, I'm not that flexible when it comes to offering stuff like that. After some time, I do think some people could, it's something that you're gonna have to work with. I also think that you could have issues, for example, I'm like going all over the place, but you could have issues, example, with learning certain educational skills too, like concentration. Concentration is a big problem here, because Neptune is a gassy, confusing planet that's very like wishy-washy in that sense of like, is it not? You're not trusting your intuition sometimes with the responses you're giving when you're writing exams or when you're learning something, because you're second guessing yourself because you don't trust yourself when you could in fact be right. So, or maybe you could be wrong, but for the most part, it's you second guessing yourself that sometimes can give you those wrong answers, and you might not always work very good when it comes to group works, not necessarily because you can't get along. I think this is a great placement to get along with people, but the problem is you learning experience, you learning the material will not retain, like, you will not retain the material if you are in a group setting. You might just get lost in the sauce because your learning methods are very different from other people, and you're trying to you could be adjusting yourself to everyone, but it's not your own, I guess best way of saying, energy and wavelength of how you learn to do things and grasp things so you can explain things back to people. So you're gonna learn to do that on your own time, or you might have an incredibly tough time until you realize this is the preferred method for you. Or you could also prefer learning through visuals. You can grasp so much information and explain so much information from a single picture rather than writing. Or you can pick up a lot of cues, by the way. This is another way you can learn, where you can learn about feelings and emotions and stuff like that when it comes to writing. You pick up things through writing too. Mercury is writing communication, so any form of communication, even talking, can be interesting. I think you get certain things, I guess the best way of saying is you're intuitive and you pick up a lot. You're very sensitive when it comes to topics that you can be communicating about, or just things that you start learning. It's like, whoa. So it can be a little bit intense, and it can be like that, where it's just some people are more subtly sensitive than others. But learning is going to be one of those tough lessons. Not impossible, but it's going to be one of those, like, you start learning not like through procedure, like A, B, C, D, E. You're like A, Z, E, F, another Y, and then finally D, E, F. It's like you go back to front. Information is not linear in this placement, so you're gonna have to learn to make sense of what doesn't make sense to you, because you're really good at that. There's a method to madness. Just learn to channel that intuitively. You're just gonna learn. Every person's different, so don't feel like it's one of those things you should feel bad about, because you are smart. It's just that you work in a very different manner that's more visual, it's more hands-on, creative, it's more different, and more solo. I think it's very much on your own kind of stuff. So do keep that in mind. And then another thing that you can also go, I didn't mention this earlier, but when you're taking your travels, right? Your short distance travels, by the way, because this is the house of short distance travels, and your community and stuff, you might get lost too. Even you could know this area, but sometimes you might get lost because you're focusing a lot on I guess you're focusing a lot on like trying to do things right, that you might get lost in the actual like turning points. When you're supposed to be turning, you don't turn and you end up in a like really far out location when you're not supposed to. Or you can also arrive late to locations because you got confident that you would make it in time and you didn't. So it could be like that. You could be someone that takes scenic routes. You can also, sorry, I had to burp. So you could also take those scenic routes, and it might be beautiful, but sometimes it can irk people that want to get to locations faster. Sometimes passengers can be a little impatient, but do keep that in mind, that if you're traveling with someone with displacement, that they're going to take their time to be safe, or just because they like views, they like to get distracted, they want to go have those stops. It's like, oh, you want to take a rest stop? Cool, let's go. Oh, you want to take pictures over here? Cool. Oh, let's go visit this place. Cool. Like, you might end up getting very distracted on your way. You eventually get to that location that you need to do, but it's not like you're gonna have that priority in mind. It's like, I mean, I went there, I got there, that's what counted, right? It's very much that kind of mentality where we got there in one piece, but we're fine. So do keep that in mind, that sometimes the experience is more important than the actual speed in here. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I will continue to write more notes in the video, so please continue to watch this if you guys are enjoying this, and I'll see you in a different video. So bye everybody and have a great day.